Hello, everyone, and welcome to our 21st Global Public Seminar in Comparative and International Education. My name is Maria Changseliani. I'm Associate Professor of Comparative and International Education at Oxford. These seminars are jointly organized by the Department of Education and St. Edmund Hall at the University of Oxford. Before introducing our speaker, and we are delighted to have Jan Luo together with us, let me attend to a few administrative points. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted online in due course. We will only record the presentation itself. We will not record the Q&A section of the webinar. Please try to keep yourself muted throughout the webinar unless you have been invited to speak. If you want to ask a question or to share a comment, please use the chat function at the time when you have the question or comment. That can be during the presentation, okay? Just write out very briefly your question or comment in the chat. When the presentation ends, I will invite people in the order that I see their comments or questions coming in, okay? When I invite you, please unmute yourself, switch on your video if you can, and state your name and where you are from and ask your question or share your comment. So very important to share those in the chat as soon as you have questions and comments. Now, let me introduce our today's speaker, Dr. Jan Luo. Jan Luo is an associate professor at the Institute of Education at Tsinghua University in China. She serves as associate editor of International Journal of Educational Research. Jan Luo got her first degree and her master's degree from the Department of Education at Beijing Normal University. She obtained her doctorate from the Department of Sociology at the University of Hong Kong. Prior to joining Tsinghua University, Jan Luo was a postdoctoral researcher at the Indiana University Bloomington. She has also served as an expert at the headquarters of UNESCO in Paris. Jan Luo works in sociology of education. She has recently published on different topics within sociology of education, including social motivation and deep approaches to learning, mechanisms of evaluating higher education outcomes, governing quality in higher education, emotional engagement and student satisfaction. She has also written on the expansion and inequality in higher education in China. Much of her work is embedded in sociological neo-institutionalism. Today's talk is titled Revisiting Social Reproduction Theory, an empirical study based on the data of PISA 2018. This talk is based on a paper that was recently published in International Journal of Educational Research. I will share a link to this paper in the chat shortly.
You actually are in the evenings, and this is the world we experience maybe at the same moment, but in different places and in different times. The good news is that we can talk to each other, although virtually. And as talk is concerned, today I'm going to share with you a piece of research I conducted in 2022. It's based on a research we have just published. The title of the research is Revisiting Social Reproduction Theory, Exploring the Influence of Economic and Cultural Capital on Students' Achievement in China. If you feel interested in this article, here is the idea of the article, and you can search and find and read it. So, what's wrong with this? Oh my God.
It is working. Yeah, it's the
Yeah, I cannot see my PPT. I can't see my PPT now. So should I stop
Shall I screen share from my side? Do you think would that be easier?
Yeah, it would be easier. I can see the article, but I cannot see my video.
Okay, if you stop sharing from your side, I will
Okay.
try to share from my side. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And you just tell me when you want me to move on.
Okay, thank you.
We are very sorry to all attendees. Sometimes
Yes,
okay.
Yeah, I can see. Yeah, thank you. The theme of the article is revisiting social reproduction theory. Maybe next slide, because let's go to the introduction. Yes. Yeah, next slide, please. Thank you. Reproduction. Social reproduction is a very key topic in sociology as a discipline, because every sociologist pursue to answer a key question, that is how a society maintains its order. And Karl Marx, who is a key figure of classical sociologists in the 19th century, he tried to provide his answer. He said, every social process of production is at the same time a process of reproduction. And he analyzed capitalist society. He said, capitalist production produces not only commodities and not only supplies value, but it also produces and reproduces the capitalist relationship. On the one side is capitalist social class, on the other side is the wage labeling class. And next, could you, next slide.
Is it research purpose you want?
Yes, that means a society maintains itself as it reproduces. So the purpose of my research has two aspects. Firstly, to examine whether social reproductions occurs in China, so as we can understand whether the trend of social stratification do exist in China, because many scholars in the 1990s and early 21st centuries, they conducted a lot of research to uncover that China is in a process of social transition from a social status-oriented society into a social stratified society. So I want to make sure whether this is true. And another purpose of my study is to examine the effects of social reproduction theory in different social contexts, especially social institutions. We examine China as a main case compared to the United States, France, and Finland. And the latter three countries actually fall into the category of liberal state and corporate state and the social democratic states in respective. So I want to check the effects of social reproduction theory in these different social institutions. How do they function? Are they functioning the similar way, or they function in different way? Thank you. For next slide. Please, next slide. Could you go, Mel? Can you go down to next slide?
I think, Jan, it's very slow before you see. So which slide shall I go to? Is it the social, this slide or earlier?
Can we just restart? And then I would like to try whether I can.
Okay, because that may be easier. I'm really sorry to everyone.
Yeah. It's not your problem. It's the problem of this tours. I never use it in China. So
So
can you see?
yes, we do see. Do you want to continue this way, not make it full screen, because something happens when you make it full
Yes,
screen?
yes,
Let's
yes,
continue
yes,
this way.
yes. And this is the paper I will not repeat. And this is introduction, and this is the about social reproduction. Social reproduction is a very key theme in the field of sociology. Every sociologist wanted to find a very qualified or quality answer to this key question. And social reproduction gives an angle to answer the question in a very concise way. That means a society maintains itself because it reproduces. So you can see social reproduction theory is a very important and in fact a very key aspect of the series in sociology. And why do we visit, or why should we revisit this series? It's because when we say we revisit a theory, that means the theory maybe experience a period of interruption. So in the case of social reproduction theory, the interruption comes from the past several decades under the banner of neoliberalism. You see, in the last century, maybe in the late 1970s and the 1980s, the end of Cold War set the scene for a golden era of globalization, which brings the theme of mobility rather than social reproduction into the center of human life. And in this way, reproduction as a theme was marginalized. However, such kind of intensive globalization started to slow down after the global financial crisis occurred in 2008. So a very well-known magazine, Monthly Review, which actually I think takes the stand of rather leftist. The editor of the magazine, Foster, described an increasing body of work on social reproduction theory, which he believes reflects the recurrence of interest in the paradigm of social reproduction. And in the year 1982, DiMaggio, who is an American sociologist, he proposed a cultural mobility model in one of his research papers, which actually consists of two statements. The first one, the first element of the model is that cultural capital's impact on school success is largely net, that of family background. And here, family background is a very common sense language. And this is some kind of problematic because if we read the paper, the term knowledge is operationalized in the variable of parents' education. But we see in the 1980s, the enrollment rate of higher education in the United States is very high. So the concept of family background, if we operationalize it in the parents' education background, is not distinctive enough. And another aspect of the theory is about returns to cultural capital are highest for students who are least advantaged. And this theory is very interesting, but I want to see whether this is true. So we have two research purposes. The first is to examine whether social reproduction occurs in China, because we feel interested in the structural change of the society. And the other is to examine the effects of social reproduction in various social institutions I mentioned before. And so here come to the slide. Why is China important for us to revisit? Because the case of China actually constitutes an extreme case. When we say extreme case, we mean it is very unusual, especially when we compare to Anglo-American and Western European countries that are usually described in sociology as social stratified societies. Traditional China is described in another way. It is a very status-oriented society with very high social mobility. If you feel interested in this, I can provide several relative studies, which is empirically and might feel interesting to you. And although such approach was interrupted in the late 19th century by the globalization framed by the Western colonialism, China soon restored into a destratified society when the People's Republic was established in 1949. And Andrew Warder, who is a scholar very famous in the field of China study, and from Harvard University, he names this situation with a terminology, neo-traditionalism for China. So this is very interesting because it is so different from the case of Anglo-American Western countries. But in the late 1970s, China changed. It started to seek the strategy of globalization on its own initiative. And here, because I cannot see my PPT in full screen, so I guess there is a blue column in the right. I would like to share a story with you. It's about a letter from Pan Xiao. Pan Xiao actually is not a person, because we reveal now that it is totally a fabrication by a magazine, Chinese Youth, which is a very orthodox magazine in China. That in this letter, the so-called person Pan Xiao raised an interesting question. That is, what is the purpose of life? Meaning, is one should live for him or herself, or is he or she should live for some common good? This is a very interesting question, because it intrigued a wide discussion in China. Some parties believe, of course, it should be altruism, because at that time, and in fact, in the 1,000 years before that time, all Chinese people believe one should live for some common good, maybe for your parents, or maybe for the family, or maybe for the country, anything, but not only for himself or herself. But since the question is raised with a question mark, that means there are other possibilities, right? So there are other parties who actually, they are very brave. They say, okay, it's not true. Maybe in some cases, people live for himself or for herself. So this is a very important historical incidence for Chinese people, and in fact, for all Chinese communities. So after several months argument and debate, they reach some kind of balance. You see, Chinese people are very good at balancing two extreme things. They say, okay, maybe one person live by intention for themselves, but in fact, for reality, they maybe benefit some common good. When I share you with this story, I want to remind you that this is the very moment that the assumption of rational economic man actually staged into the arena of China. This is the moment that Chinese people, they want to reshape their spiritual world. And after this, many scholars believe China would be driven and would be changed by the process of marketization. So a lot of researchers, they rush to investigate the process of stratification of China. But for me, I think this is a bit problematic, because you can figure out only a decade or 2 decades. It's not a long time enough for people to witness a society changes from a status-oriented into a social group-based stratified, because only 1 decade or 2 decades is only a short time for an individual to grow. Maybe the next generation, only teenagers, or only in their youth, and they not enter into the market of labor. So how can you see the evidence of stratification? But now, when we start the research, 40 years have passed. Is it the good time and it's the right time for us to revisit whether Chinese society has really changed from a status-oriented? When we say status-oriented, it means the society is structured by a hierarchy of status rankings. But when we say stratified, it means the society is also is ranked, but grouped based, not individual status based. So this is a very important change that we want to investigate, and we want to find the answer whether it really happens. So if we want to see, if we want to investigate about a societal structure, so why social reproduction theories means in this case is because if Chinese society remains its high social mobility characteristics, then social reproduction would not happen, or would happen in a very low level. So we try to examine this from this angle. There are many aspects about social reproduction theories, and my research will actually concentrate only on 2 main aspects of the theory. One is economic reproduction, the other is cultural reproduction. That does not mean that I'm not interested in the other 2 aspects, namely the state hegemony model and the resistance model. In 2018, I worked with my colleagues to uncover the bonus grades policy. This policy is something when you see all Chinese kids, they need to enter the national college entrance examination. But if you can enjoy the bonus grades, then you can get admitted by very little university with comparative lower grades. This is a very, how to say, controversial policy in China. But our study revealed that this policy actually favors the advantaged social groups for their kids to get access to, say, Tsinghua or Beida, such kind of Chinese elite universities. So in this way, it supports or somehow approves the state hegemony theory, that state as a mediator through, for example, making certain policies or construction of certain curriculums, or by the initiate some kind of national projects to favor certain advantaged social groups to get educational benefits for their kids. Another theory in concerning about social reproduction is resistance theory. I am working with some of my colleagues to uncover the resistance of students about performance-based learning cultures, the GPA-oriented learning style. How we found that through such kind of resistance, the students who adopt such kind of strategies, they actually disfavor themselves in the status, both in study and in employment. So in the paper we published in 2022, we didn't cover these two aspects of social reproductions, although we collected, or in certain degree, or somehow we approve such two theory models actually functions in China. So in this paper, we only try to uncover economic reproduction model and cultural reproduction model. Here, I want to mention two things. First is that many people uncover social economic status with students' academic achievements, but they operationalize the concept of economic capital in the form, for example, SES index. SES index actually is not correspond with the concept economic capital in the theory form. For example, usually speaking, SES is measured by several dimensions. For example, the career of parents, the career of parents' education, and sometimes they also to uncover the parents' some other traits. But actually, economic capital only, according to the theory of Max Weber, it only goes to the dimension of family wealth. So in this research, in our research, we just restrict the operationalization of the concept economic capital in the form of family wealth. And this is the very difference between our research and other researchers. And for cultural capital, this is even more confusing because the concept of cultural capital, many scholars use in different way. For example, the research I mentioned before by DiMaggio, he invented his own measurement, which cannot differentiate the artistic activities by the students. They learn either from their families or from the schools, but actually from the theory of Bourdieu and his colleagues, and cultural capital restricted and in fact embedded in the institution of family. So it means it comes from the assumption that class stratified society, in such kind of society, different cultures exist for different social classes. So this is a concept embedded only in the family, not to including the school's curriculum as well. So this is very important point here for us to operationalize the concept. And as the theory argued, that cultural arbitraries that education tries to impose on children are mainly the values, beliefs, and the knowledge of the dominant social class. And because of this, the kids from the advantaged social class, they have some kind of advantage, which the kids from other social class, they do not have or have less of. And in this way, we operationalize the concept of cultural capital in the form of the objectified form capital, also cultural capital measured by PISA. So here we propose 3 hypotheses. The first hypothesis, we believe that students comes from wealthy family tend to achieve better in education compared to their parallels. And the second hypothesis concerns about students who come from family with more cultural capital tends to achieve better in education compared to their parallels. And the third is a very interesting one. We propose students come from family that parents provide more emotional support would achieve better in education compared to their parallels. So you may feel interested. Why should I, together with my colleagues, propose this hypothesis? Because in a transitional society, we found students experience a serious psychological problem, and many of them have the problem of their well-being is problematic. And we find that students from advantaged social groups, they have better well-being because of their parents give them, more emotional support. So this could be a new form of psychological capital, or we can construct it into a new dimension of cultural capital as a kind of spiritual advantage. So we propose these 3 hypotheses. And here comes to the methods. Concerning the research design, we adopt multiple case embedded design. When we say multiple case embedded design, means China, we take China as a main case, and we take the United States, France, and Finland as 3 comparative case. And the reason is because they fall into different types of states, social institutions, and as the level of school segregation is concerned, they actually also falls into various levels. For example, France is among the highest segregation countries, and the United States is of median level, and Finland shows less school segregation. And here comes to the data. We adopted the PISA 2018 because it's the latest data we can find. And as for the operationalization of the conception, we take dependent variable students' achievement in the form of reading score. The reason why we use reading score as dependent variable is because the paper actually is called upon by a special issue, and the theme of the special issue is about reading. So we take reading score as the dependent variable to indicate the student's academic achievement. And the independent variables, we have 3 family wealth to indicate is the operationalization of the concept of economic capital. And here, cultural capital is a great pity because the PISA 2018 do not have the dimension of embodied cultural capital. In the year 2000, it tries to have the dimension of embodied cultural capital, but it's very difficult to keep the inventory of embodied cultural capital cross-national or cross-culturally measurement consistency. So they delete dimension later. So we can only have the objectified cultural capital here. And the parents' emotional support is indexed, constituted by a few items. And here is another difference of our research, because we control all the factors concerning schools and some individual aspects. The reason is that we believe cultural capital as a concept is embedded in family. It's not a very broad concept that many scholars believe that all the cultural traits in alignment with school achievement belongs to or equals or they're defined as cultural capital. We don't think this is true or this is desirable, because this does not follow the theory itself. And it makes the effect of family and with that of from the school or from other social sources. And this is the potential mediator variables. The reason why we consider this is because we want to test the mediation of habitus for the reading, which we operationalize the habitus in 2 dimensions. One is enjoyment of reading, because our dependent variable is reading score. And the other is the strategy adopted by the students. So we conducted.
If we could finish in about 5 minutes to have some time for questions and answers, will be
okay. No problem.
Thank you.
So this is the strategy of data analysis, and this is the finding, and this is the correlation tables. You can find all the variables, they correlate with each other, but the problematic aspect is here for China. Family wealth, the correlation between family wealth and the cultural capital in the objectified form actually is a bit higher than the other 3 countries. We cannot say just from this rather higher correlation, we say China is already a stratified, because the family wealth can somehow constructed together with the cultural capital, and this is a very strong indication for stratified society. But we need more evidence to support this, to investigate into this. And this is the findings or the results of the, I cannot see the title because there are so many other labels in my screen. The effect of economic and cultural capital, I guess, for the China, United States, France, and Finland. And here is for China. The first model, we run only control variable and dependent variable, and we will find the R-square is 0.3. But when we put into other 3 variables, this is economic capital, cultural capital, emotional support, and you can see the R-square increase, but not in a large, how to say, significantly degree. But here is for United States, France, and Finland, the situation is similar. But for United States, there is a very unique thing, because for China, when other variables are added, the effect of family wealth doesn't show significance. But for United States, it is the only country, even we add other 2 variables, the effect of family wealth are stable. It is still there. And this is the mediation effect of habitus, and you can see this is that means the mediation function exists across the 4 countries. And here, we got to the conclusion, we found a significant effect of family wealth on students' academic achievement do exist in the United States, which is a liberal state. And emotional support, the effect only exists for China and Finland. They are collective somehow in culture. The most important finding drawn from our study is that the significant effect of objectified cultural capital on students' academic achievement exists across all the 4 selected countries, mediated in the same mechanism that the habitus across the 4 countries. So here comes to the end. From our study, we can see that China is under the process of social stratification because the effect of social reproduction economically and culturally do exist. And just to try to think about high correlation between family wealth and objectified cultural capital. This is very significant finding for us because it indicates that China is departing its traditionalism and neo-traditionalism. This is a term fabricated by Andrew Warder, where cultural capital toward with parental emotional support play a vital role in such kind of process. Another finding we didn't state in our paper, but I would like here to share with you is that cultural mobility model actually is not supported in our study because when D. Major published his article because of the operationalization, which I think maybe is problematic, his article actually support partially, especially for the group of males, the cultural mobility model. And the limitation because of the time. I'm sorry, Mel, because the technical problems, I cannot see the full scale.
That's okay. I'm so sorry.
Pick out all my screen is all kinds of labels, just like a black